Our chalice lighting this morning are the words of colleague Laura Bogle. We gather here to remember this is our home, but not just ours. The land we live on, the water we drink, the air we breathe. These old mountains that hold us steady to our ground. These forests that give us their healing green, these flowers that give us their beauty and fragrance, these fields that give us our daily bread, these stars that show us our place, the wilderness and the tame backyards, all of it our home. We remember the ancestors who have lived on this land and who have shaped it, the Chappaquiddick, Herring Pond, Pawcasset, and the Seekonk tribes of the Wampanoag Nation, the Chalbungungamug and the Hassonamisco tribes of the Nipmuc Nation. We inherit their choices. We honor the animals and creatures that have made their home in this land, the ones here now and the ones that used to be here. We envision the future generations who will live on this land and let their voices fill our hearts. We gather here to remember this is our home, but not just ours. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Worcester's online Sunday morning worship service. We are so glad that you've joined us virtually this morning. It is an act of love that we gather in this way during this time of pandemic response. We hope that this service gives you an opportunity to pause for a few moments and gather in community so that we might care for each other and take a moment to reflect on our own well-being, discover opportunities for spiritual refreshment, even as we are at a personal distance. We will gather this way at least through the fall. Throughout the next few weeks, our religious exploration program will be offering opportunities for children and youth to gather virtually as well. Please visit www.uucworcester.org for more information on these get-togethers, as well as other opportunities to meet for discussion and support. For safety purposes, and so that we might come to know each other better, as you are able, please list your name on your video feed. Please note that this service is being live streamed over Facebook and is being recorded and will be available on the church YouTube channel in the coming days. Following this service this morning, you are invited to join us for a virtual fellowship hour by staying on the Zoom channel. Welcome. Our invocation this morning are words by my colleague Jude Gear. Spirit of life, God of many names, source of hope. We come together at the end of another week, some worn down by struggles of health, of home, of work. May we be a community that makes space for the sharing of joys and sorrows, angers and hopes with grace and forbearance. In our nation's life, we pause this holiday weekend to remember the Native American lives lost from the European colonization on what is now our soil. Teach us to remember our history. Though we cannot make amends for what has come before, we may learn from those ways, never to repeat them in our lives today. May we develop new ways of relating neighbor to stranger without violence or coercion, deceit or greed. Mother of grace, help us to find a sense of humility where we have privilege and strength where we face oppression. In our struggles, may we learn compassion, and in our power, may we learn temperance. As a community of faith, may we be a safe harbor in a world that is often harsh toward difference. Challenge us to use our presence as a healing force for justice and equity, knowing that although we have come far in the civil rights struggles of our times, there are many people that are still left behind, and the work of building beloved community is just as pressing as ever before. Our opening hymn this morning is Hallelujah, played and sung by Matthew Johnson. Please join us.
Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Now invite Robin Mickiewicz to join us for our religious exploration moment.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Robin Mickiewicz. I am the Director of Religious Exploration here at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Worcester. This morning, our children met with Anna Gregory and read the book We Came to America, which honors our Indigenous people in America. It also talks about immigration and the people who came to America and where they came from and how they came. Anna posed the question to the children, where did your family come from? We continue to have these good conversations with children over Zoom on 9 o'clock on Sunday mornings, and I feel very lucky to be able to do this with the children. Last week we formed a middle school group. They named themselves the Masked Bandits. We met outside behind the church. They are our pre-coming of age class and are very excited to get together to talk about what they believe, what they care about in the world, and also to do some group building. For Halloween, we are offering on Halloween Day from 2 to 3 p.m. a safe alternative for children who cannot or do not want to trick or treat. We're having an hour-long activity and parade behind our church in costume. We are doing pumpkin painting and giving out goodie bags on the way out. We are happy to be able to offer this to our families. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robin. Our reading this morning is by my colleague Alicia Ford, entitled We Are Not Guests. I am a guest here in this house. Are you? Are we guests here in this house? And whose house do we inhabit? In the small world of our lives, the borders between us, easements, fences, gates, hedges, serve to delineate, to separate us, to remind us of where my property begins and ends, where your property begins and ends. If you cross over, you are a trespasser or a guest in my house. You've worked to own this small plot of land and the house erected on it. You've claimed it. It's now part of yourself, your definition of self, your identity. If I cross over your fences, I am a trespasser or a guest in your house. What does it mean then that in 1845, the United States crossed over into Mexico and took half of that country, took land, resources, labor? Was the U.S. trespasser or guest? And are there to be no consequences for taking what does not belong to you? Should we simply forget those whose house we inhabit? To speak of hospitality and immigration often erases historical context, the actions of the past that have led us step by step into this current predicament. Professor Miguel de la Torre writes, perhaps it might be more accurate to speak of the responsibility of restitution rather than the virtue of hospitality. Hospitality in this case implies that the house belongs to us, that the land, the resources that are part of this house are ours, and we who now live here are being virtuous in our willingness to share. It erases the history that would have us remember that those who cross the border today, those choosing to brave the harsh conditions of the desert, those who face the possibility of death, imprisonment, deportation, criminalization, are doing so because the U.S. once crossed their borders to extract their resources and labor. It is for them a matter of survival. It is for the United States a matter of restitution. The prospect of restitution is scary. Where do we begin? With Mexico? With Native Americans? With territories? With the descendants of those who were enslaved? How do we acknowledge and address the complexities of our history, present, and if we are not conscious, future of dominance? What would right relationship look like? What conditions and considerations would make restitution possible? And for us Unitarian Universalists, what would it mean for us to shake off the idea of hospitality as a central principle that is often attached to immigration and delve into the concept of restitution? Whose house do we inhabit? For we are not hosts. We are not owners, nor are we guests. What then is our responsibility? We come to that moment in our service when we are given an opportunity to share that which is symbolic of our own effort, our own values, that which we cherish most in our lives, an offertory and an offering that we share each time that we come together for the purpose of worship. This morning, I invite you to participate in our offering by texting your offering to 508-231-5335 or visiting www.uucworcester.org/donate. Our morning offering will now be received. I'm going to stop screen share. Once again, beloved, we come to that time in our service when we are given pause to consider what is deepest in our hearts or most profoundly on our minds, or in the work of our hands in the days that have transpired or in the prospect of days to come. Joys and sorrows that touch us deeply and are given another measure of meaning because of our capacity to share them in the midst of a company that claims us as a co-journeyer. So I invite you, if you have a joy or sorrow that you would like to share, to either virtually raise your hand in Zoom or to open your microphone so that I might identify you. If you're joining us by live stream on Facebook, if you have a joy or sorrow to share, please place it in the chat and we will communicate it from there. Are there joys or sorrows to be shared this day? David.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I got both a sorrow and I guess it's it's a joy. I have a family member who's been incarcerated for close to 2 years, and and he's he doesn't have an end in sight. It's pending. He could be until December 2026, barring a successful appeal. But it's been challenging to it's emotionally challenging. I think somebody made the statement once that a person goes to prison, their whole family are kind of part of it to some degree. It's been difficult financially. Like he's wanting to get a tablet and data for his tablet, and we don't have a ton of money. But I just thought a big blessing Thanksgiving that some federal judge in California apparently ruled that people who filed their taxes in 2018 will qualify for a stimulus check. These are inmates where they hadn't before, so it looks like he might get a little extra money to get things he needs in the prison. So both the sorrow and the joy there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Are there other joys or sorrows to be shared this day? I note in the chat that we are delighted to welcome Mason Joseph Lenahand, who was born this week to Rain Lenahand, and Rain and Mason join Mason's grandmother, Rain's mother, Laura, for today's service. This is Mason's first public appearance, so we're grateful to have him with us this day.
Hi, Aaron.
Tom.
Yeah, I just want to share, Rita is now in the Oasis long-term care facility. It's over by Higgins Armory, or the former Higgins Armory. And from what I understand, she's doing well. Her challenge is that she has to be quarantined for 2 weeks, and her behavior is that she likes to walk around a lot. So this will be a challenge, but I hope she gets through it. She has aides with her, so hopefully this will work out.
Thank you so much, Tom. Our prayers and thoughts are with you and with Rita during this time of transition. Thank you so much for sharing that with us this morning. Matthew, I see that your mic is unmuted.
Yeah, I had something that happened a week ago Saturday that was kind of exciting. I have, from 4 years ago, I did a trip to many different places, including Uganda. And I have still several friends in Uganda that I'm in touch with. And during the period of COVID, I've kept in touch with them and found that that if I sent money in that direction, that it got used very well. And after taking a little bit of money and distributing it to quite a few people, my friend has determined that he wants to create a new organization, a non-governmental organization, which he has done during this period of the pandemic. And last Saturday had its first food distribution in a part of Kampala called Kosovo. place where there's some very some people who are very hungry, and they were able to feed about 50 families, and give shoes to kids who needed it, and distribute toothbrushes, and it was actually kind of an exciting thing. A few friends of mine and myself were able to kind of help make that happen, along with about 16 people from Kampala, 16 young people. So this is for me a great joy in this period of contraction, to see the birth of a new nonprofit, and to have something to do with it across the world, if you will.
Thank you so much, Matt. Judy Savage.
Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
How's that?
Yay.
What do you know? My first time.
Welcome, Judy.
Thank you. My love to Tom and Rita, dear old friends, first of all. And I have not been in touch with anybody pretty much. So this is old news, but I still wanted to share it. On August the 31st, I had to euthanize my cat, Max. He had oral cancer, so it was very fast moving and he would not have lived longer. So I made the awful decision to euthanize him. He was my beloved companion of 18 years. He was considered a super senior, and he was super in many ways. He was wacky, and towards the end, very, very cuddly and friendly. So we had quite a journey together. I miss him so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Paul.
Yes, I was talking with Pauline. Her cat is missing, and like Jude, I had a cat too, and I had to put it down after like 19 years, and it's like losing a member of the family. And so, keep her in the thoughts, and if you know her well, give her a call, ask her how she's doing.
That's great. Thank you so much, Paul. Kim Napoleone writes in the chat, I'm asking for prayers for my dear friend Brian. He had a massive stroke and will need a lot of care. He lives in Florida and is moving to a care facility, and he doesn't have any family nearby to visit. And Sharon Templeman writes, please send prayers and good wishes to my friend Donna and her husband. Her husband has been in the hospital and is now in rehab. Donna failed her stress test and went immediately to bypass surgery. She is recovering in Boston. Are there other joys or sorrows to be shared this day? Let us be in the spirit of prayer and meditation. Spirit of life, source of our inner and outermost being, we come to this moment with gratitude in our hearts for life newly beginning and the arrival of Mason. We also come understanding the many challenges that so many folk face in our communities. This day, those incarcerated who seek the opportunity to find ways to connect to the world, even as they are at a distance. We grieve the loss of our four-footed friends. and we honor the journey of those who continue to seek health and wholeness, surrounding them with all manner of love. And we celebrate good work well done in communities where people are mindful of the plight of others and who use their own resources and others to contribute to the well-being and the survival and thriving of community. Help us remember our own capacity for internal healing and to reach out to those around us and participate in the spirit of community that brings about that health and wholeness to the largest possible population. On this day, we are also mindful of the land that we inhabit and the ancestors that came before us, who also claimed belonging and claim belonging. Let us be mindful of our privilege and the history fraught with the imperialism of nations, so that we might not continue to repeat what has been done in the past and find a different way, more peaceful and prosperous for all of Earth's people, for all that is true, right, real, and good this day. We give great thanks. Amen, and blessed be. My reflection this morning begins with a mountaintop experience. Moses atop Mount Nebo, having arrived at the place where his people will enter the land they have been promised. For Moses' part, he will not go with them into the land. His time as prophet and leader has come to an end, and he concludes his duties by blessing the tribes that have wandered through the desert together with him, and then stands on the mountaintop and surveys Negev and the valley of Jericho. It's a scene which has been etched into the memory of many who experienced the words of Martin Luther King Jr. I do not know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't matter to me now because I've been to the mountaintop and I don't mind. Like everybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go to the mountaintop, and I've looked over and I have seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. Commenting on that portion of Torah that tells this particular story, Rabbi Nama Kelman Rechi writes, part of Moses's blessing involves the ability to dream of what he will not see or experience directly. Affirming the future is what leadership is all about. Knowing and accepting that our best dreams may not be realized by others, may be realized by others who come after us. Moses' words remind us that we need to pray and work for the blessings of justice, equity, and peace in order to fulfill our promises as peoples and to build the best family, community, society, and country that we can. We learn from Moses that sometimes we have to scale mountains in order to come closer to these blessings. We learn from Moses that sometimes we have to scale mountains in order to come closer to these blessings. These words lived with me this week as I ruminated over this morning's reflection. So much of the stuff that we continue to be mired in seems daunting at best, and at the other extreme, life-threatening, much like mountain climbing. But for those who have ever climbed the world's toughest peaks, there are some other realities that we might encounter as well. We often find ourselves on paths that have the marks of those who climbed before us, with clamps and carabiners left for us to attach our ropes to. We read their travel logs as we prepare for our own ascent. For Moses and the Hebrew people, reality dawns that the land they have been waiting for is already occupied, which ought to be for them, as it does in the retelling of the story, a place to pause and consider how it is that one enters such a promised place. For me, it has been instructive that the holiday of Simchat Torah, which our Jewish friends celebrate on this day this year, includes both the recitation of that portion of the book of Deuteronomy which recounts this moment and thus concludes the annual cycle of Torah readings. And the holiday includes the reading of the first part of the book of Genesis, thus beginning another annual cycle of such readings. And here's the thing for me. The moment that the cycle ends with the entrance into the promised land, by the Hebrew people, the cycle returns to the beginning by reading about the creation of the world. Dr. Ellen Umansky, the Carl and Dorothy Bennett Professor of Judaic Studies at Fairfield University, comments on this, saying, when we begin the cycle of Torah readings each year, however, I am reminded that God's first creative act, even before God brought the sky and earth into being, was to create light, Darkness already existed on the face of the chaotic waters, yet as God's Spirit glided over it, God created light, choosing not to inject the light into the darkness, but rather to create it as a distinct entity which God proclaims to be good. She continues, my interest, however, does not lie primarily in the nature of light and darkness, but in how we actually experience them. The early verses of Genesis describing the chaos of darkness accurately reflects, I think, the muddiness of dark thoughts and the sense of loneliness that people often feel when they are literally or figuratively in the dark. In contrast, many of us equate light with physical and spiritual illumination, moments of clarity or meaning often accompanied with feelings of joy and gratitude. These are the moments in which I count my blessings, reminding myself of how many things in my life are good, instead of dwelling on that which is bad. In these moments, I experience what the Torah identifies as God's spirit, ruach, as divinity itself. God not as being on high who zaps the light and eventually the world and all living beings into creation, but rather God as life force and life source, who helps bring forth and sustains creation. Ruach can also be translated as wind or breath. Words that, like spirit, convey motion. Spirit, wind, breath can be felt and experienced, but not seen. They are invisible forces that energize us, perhaps leading to an awareness of God as the power, not ourselves, that makes for righteousness, as the well-known formulation from Matthew Arnold's literature back in the 19th century. Matthew Arnold's formation is reminiscent of rabbinic legend identifying the light created by God with the primordial light of consciousness, a light much brighter than the sun that shines on the deeds of the righteous. Similarly, the great 13th century mystic text, the Zohar, equates the primordial light with the light of the eye, the light showed by God to Adam, which enabled him to see from one end of creation to the other. Rabbi Lawrence Kushner identifies this inner structure of consciousness as the realm of being that comes before us and follows after us, streaming through and uniting all creation. It is, he writes, the way of the Tao, or drawing on the Zohar, a river of light. Kushner does not limit awareness of this river to the righteous. Ideally, it is available to all who open themselves to the reality of light in the world and in each of us. And we open ourselves to this reality, we actually may experience what Abraham Joshua Heschel, the great Hasidic leader, called the momentous realness of God, and the beauty, peace, and power flowing through our souls as a result of this realization. Thus, as Heschel wrote, the essence of Jewish religious thinking does not lie in entertaining a concept of God, but in the ability to articulate a memory of moments of illumination by the divine presence. The essence of Jewish religious thinking does not lie in entertaining a concept of God, but in the ability to articulate a memory of moments of illumination. This was the spiritual task for those who stood with Moses on the mountaintop, to remember those moments when they were enslaved, and the moments that challenged them as they made their way through the wilderness toward freedom, and to carry that memory with them as they entered a land that others already called home. And it is this spiritual task which continues to challenge us and our world today. Here is the confluence this year between Simchat Torah and Indigenous Peoples Day. At a time when we are bidden to reflect on the history, gifts, and realities faced by those whose ancestors called this land home, which was discovered by others. This is the lesson of Genesis for those experiencing the Deuteronomic conclusion of their long journey. For in Genesis, what one is reminded of is that the entire human species is of divine origin, a product of the gift of creation itself, of the spirit of Ruach, of the illumination of divine light. And this reality ought to give one pause to consider the nature and prospect of our relatedness to others who also occupy the land we enter and seek to share. Or as writer Rebecca Ratcliffe once recently noted, long before I arrived, years before people like me started to come, these lands were someone else's home. The places I explored were already known. Histories acknowledge that indigenous peoples rose up from this place, and since that day, these are the lands that they have known. Through years of separation, expatriation, exclusion, rejection, marginalization, erasure, and injustice, Native peoples have been dedicated to protecting these lands, these ways of life, their home. As we look toward a future of protecting and caring for these lands together, the first step can be by acknowledging the history of this place and the indigenous peoples who call it home. She writes from the land of the Huescos, the fisher people of the Columbia River. She writes from the land of the Peyote, those who migrated far along the high plains. She writes from the land of the warm springs where roots and berries were shared in summer and winter villages. She writes, I am connected to this past through these lands. I hope and honor and strengthen this connection by acknowledging this past, in acknowledging the traditional territory of indigenous peoples who know these places. I hope to take the first step in moving toward a more meaningful and impactful conservation future. In the absence of the consciousness of solidarity as a species and our ability to honor this history and traditions we encounter along the way, we dwell in a kind of ignorance and violence that the Reverend Rachel Tabor Hamilton of the Indigenous Network of the Episcopal Diocese of Olympia, Washington warns. Nations have been forged from the forces of colonialization, have been built upon the premise of clearing away and subjugating indigenous peoples in body, mind, and spirit. The historical trauma of indigenous peoples is intergenerational, both in our physical DNA and in our communal stories. We see the impact of historical trauma manifested in high rates of addiction, poor health, homelessness, incarceration, family breakdowns, violence, suicide, neglect, abuse, and sexual abuse, which are all disproportionately high across our peoples. Struggles for sovereignty and treaty rights continue today and are as much a part of indigenous peoples' traditions as prayers, songs, and dances. Courtrooms, government offices, jailhouses, clinics, and schools are today's battlegrounds upon which indigenous peoples are still fighting for recognition, dignity, rights, sacred sites, resources, justice, and life itself. Beloved, on this day, let us take to heart the gift of memory and the hope that how we end is where we begin, and what that provides for us. Consciousness of the fact that we are the product both of a people who wandered seeking freedom and a people who sought to conquer the world, that are both an ending and a beginning in every moment, that our histories bespeak the need for reconciliation and celebration in our communities, and the continuing energy of that illuminating power that makes us one people. Amen.
Amen.
Our litany this morning, I invite you to say as you remain muted and join together here. You will respond with the words that are italicized and bolded. In the face of hate, we answer the call of love. In the face of exclusion, we answer the call of inclusion. In the face of homophobia, we answer the call of LGBTQ rights. In the face of racism, we answer of justice for all races. In the face of xenophobia, we answer the call of pluralism. In the face of misogyny, we answer the call of women's rights. In the face of demagoguery, we answer the call of reason. In the face of religious intolerance, we answer the call of diversity. In the face of narrow nationalism, we answer the call of global community. In the face of bigotry, we answer the call of open-mindedness. In the face of despair, we answer the call of hope. As Unitarian Universalists, we answer the call of love, now more than ever. Please join in our closing hymn, Shalom Havarim. Our closing words are words adapted from the book of Numbers, chapter 6, verse 23. Beloved, may the spirit of love bless you and guard you. May the spirit of hope shine its countenance upon you and be gracious unto you. May the spirit of justice turn its countenance toward you and grant you peace.